Representative democracies fundamentally do not work. The purpose of a democratic system is to have the people's will be represented in the government and the laws it makes. Now, people, because fundamentally there are going to be, if there are issues with different answers, possible answers, options, and there are people who have different viewpoints, so long as that is the case and only one option can be chosen, there will always be people who disagree, of course. So then it is only a matter of choosing how, or rather who, gets their way. So the idea of the democratic system is to have the majority of the people get their way. Now, that is not necessarily the case. Democracy as a concept can be implemented in many ways, and there are many ways to do voting systems and all kinds of things. There could be pluralities or supermajorities or anything else really. And also, everyone getting to vote is also not inherently guaranteed, so there are many ways to implement a democratic system. But I'm talking about specifically, well, I guess I'm just going to be explaining what I would support, but I would be in favor of everyone getting to vote, not just a select group of people among the people, the greater people. Anyway, and also it should be at least a majority. A plurality system is not good enough because, well, that's just the biggest group, not the most of the people. So pluralities are bad. Plurality democracies are really awful. They are not good. So the ideal system has everyone in the population, well, at least past a certain age limit, because of course it would be stupid to let little children to vote on anything. Anyway, so people, everyone past a certain age limit, they can vote, and then it should be at least a majority. At least like most issues should be like majority things. Some issues, depending on like the importance of the thing in question, the policy or the law or whatever in question, of course, things of differing importance can have different number, like they can have a bigger or lesser supermajority requirement. Things of greater significance, of course, can have a bigger supermajority, so more and more of the people need to agree to change something that is more important than other issues. But in general, like the default should be like just a majority, so over 50% of the people. Right, so now I will want to mention one thing. Opponents of democracy like to sometimes say this analog of two wolves deciding what to eat against one sheep. So like this idea that democracies are bad because like it's basically a majority of the people deciding whatever, and then a few people get really bad results. But like I mentioned at the beginning of the speech, never can everyone be satisfied with the result, fundamentally. So long as there are people with different opinions and only one opinion can be chosen, then there will be people who don't get what they want. So, to those people who like to use that analog about the wolves and sheep, well, would you rather prefer a system where one wolf gets to decide what to eat against 100 sheep? Is that a better system then? I would say that's a joke. Anyway, such people are pretty stupid anyway. That whole analog is flawed from the start because it assumes the division of people into wolves and sheep. That's of course arbitrary. One day's sheep might as well be the next day's wolf, because the different questions being voted on, the different issues and the different policies and the laws, they are of course going to be different every day, so people are not inherently just wolves or sheep. You can just divide the people into two groups like that. It is arbitrary. Anyway, yeah, enough with that stupid analog. Let's move on. So, the preferred way to have policies and such, all the laws and everything be chosen in a country would be a democratic system like I just described, with everyone getting to vote past a certain age limit, and at least a majority. Pluralities are bad. So, now let's move on. Representative democracies are a way of doing a democratic system where instead of the people voting directly on issues, getting to say yes or no to a certain law proposal or whatever, they instead vote for people, a group of persons. The people vote for a group of persons to then go sit in a parliament or whatever the organ is called. Doesn't really matter the terminology and the specific implementations. The point is that there is a group of people, a specific group of individuals that everyone in the country, the citizens, get to vote on, and then those people, that group of people chosen by everyone in the country, that group then, those individuals in that group then vote on the actual issues. Now that is representative democracy because that group of individuals, those individuals are the representatives. So the idea there is that the ideal way that would work, the purpose, the point why that would be proposed, that sort of an idea for a country's governing system, the reason that would be proposed is because, or rather the ideal way that would work, is that while the people would then be divided into groups basically, and each group gets their politician, the representative, and that representative represents that group, and ideally this politician has the best interest of that group in mind, and then according to the interests of that group, the politician then makes decisions representing that group and in that group's favor, basically. That's the idea. But as one might deduce from the topic of this speech and what I said at the very beginning of the speech, I believe this system to be greatly flawed. In fact, I think it's quite useless, and it kind of defeats the point of having a democracy in the first place. You see, the whole idea from the start, having a representative, an individual who represents a group amongst the people, well, I'm just gonna say it straight. Why? Why not just let the people decide on the vote on the issues directly? Yeah, why not? The people, the laws apply to everyone, so the people should be naturally the ones who get to decide on the laws. So, although the ideal way that a representative democracy would work, in that system the representatives would represent the people. Yeah, but you're having some random individual, some politician, represent other people. Why? Why not just let those people decide directly themselves? So yeah, now let me elaborate. The politicians can be corrupt, for one, because the politicians, the representatives, they are human beings with their own selfish interests and all that. And also, well, actually no, let me first say this. Because they are human beings and they have their selfish interests, they are subject to monetary offerings, also called bribes, from some interest groups, and then the tendency is that the politician might accept this bribe and then make laws and policy changes in favor of that interest group who funded this politician. And that, of course, is already an obvious violation of the democratic process, because this supposed representative of the people is not actually representing the people. They are representing that interest group who funds that politician, bribes them. And yeah, like, that's obviously already an error in the system, in the thinking of a person who would implement this sort of a system. You see, it doesn't work. A representative that has decided policies based on bribes is not representing the people. So fundamentally, the representative democracy already fails at this. Now, ideally, it should be made illegal or whatever to accept bribes and to make bribes and whatever. But of course, that's kind of like up for enforcement. Like, yeah, that needs to be enforced and closely monitored. What do politicians do and where they get their monies and what they do all the time and all that stuff. Like, some things like that can be done, but like, that requires someone to enforce it. What if those enforcers are also corrupt or whatever? You know, the whole point is that, like, yeah, it gets kind of difficult to enforce some law like that when we are talking about the people who make the laws, of course, obviously. So, you know, government and all that. So a corrupt government doesn't enforce laws against itself. It enforces laws against the people. Anyway, you know, if anything, if there is going to be a representative democracy, then like the punishment should be the harshest punishment available. If you don't believe in capital punishment, then it should be life in prison, and not in any nice prison. And depending on your views of torture, that may or may not be allowed too. For corrupt politicians, you see, because a corrupt politician who accepts bribes and makes laws and such based on those bribes and the interests of the interest group who gives them the bribes, that politician has betrayed the entire people. As I described the democratic process earlier, the representative in this system is supposed to represent the people. They make laws that concern all of the people. Everyone has to follow the laws. So for this politician to not represent the people, to instead take money from some interest group, it doesn't have to be money specifically, but bribes, and then make policies according to that bribe, they have betrayed the entire people. Not just the people who are there supposed to represent the specific group with some specific viewpoint that elected them among the greater people, but the entire people too, because everyone has to follow the law, and the democratic process, as I described, is supposed to represent the will of the people. Although not everyone will be pleased, at least most of the people will. So that can be taken as the will of the people. So the politician has betrayed the democratic process and the will of the people. So because they have betrayed the entire people, that should therefore result in the harshest of punishments, because, well, he didn't just betray his best friend or his family member or a co-worker or something. He betrayed the entire people, the entirety of the population in a country, and yeah, that's really bad. So yeah, but again, who's gonna enforce that? Anyway, moving on. The representatives are still bad for other reasons, not just because they have a tendency to be corrupt. But even just talking about these systems, a politician, a person, an individual cannot possibly represent the will and interest of some group amongst the greater population in general. So take political parties, for example. A political party can have a list of opinions on specific issues. Now let's say there are a few political parties, let's say a dozen parties. Okay, well, now how are we supposed to take a country with, let's say, millions of people? Okay, there are millions of people who can have each their own opinions, and depending on how many issues there are and how many possible options there are for solving those issues, there can be like, perhaps like, well, I don't know, like that depends specifically on those issues, but let's say there could be millions of permutations of answers, like combinations, like answering, let's say just like yes or no to some questions. There's a long list of questions with like, there are different issues to vote on, yes or no, just for this example. And let's say that there are 1,000 options where you can say yes or no to each specific issue. Now that is 1,000 yes or no answers, which means that is 1,000 basically binary bits. So in the binary number system, where there is 0 and 1, that is a 1,000 digit binary number. And you know what that means, right? Well, there are 2 to the power of 1,000 possible unique solutions to that problem of all of those issues, like as a whole, considered a single problem. That list of issues, that list of 1,000 issues with yes or no answers, it can be answered with 2 to the power of 1,000 different unique answers. And that is a big number. I'm not gonna read you that entire number. You can use a calculator to count that number, 2 to the power of 1,000. That is a big number. So, considering the fact that there are so many different ways to do things, each person in the population can have their unique opinion on all of the issues as a whole. So then, now you're supposed to truncate this into 12 parties. Come on, you've already failed if this is your idea of how a country and a government should work. Like, people who would implement a representative democracy, thinking that it's the best way to have the people's will be represented in the law and all that stuff. Like, those people just don't understand math. That, like, having a list of 1,000 problems with a yes or no answer, that already is a gigantic number of possible unique solutions. And yeah, 12 parties with a set list, like each of these dozen parties, they have their own list. But you have only 12 options now, where previously, if each person in the population gets to vote on each of those specific 1,000 issues separately, yeah, instead of having this 2 to the power of 1,000 possible permutations that anyone can choose from, like, you can choose your pick for the answer out of 2 to the power of 1,000 options. So you, as a citizen, have been given 2 to the power of 1,000 options to choose from in a democratic system where the people get to vote on issues directly. But in a representative democracy, now what you have been given is 12 options, which is basically those parties that you get to vote for. So, yeah, like, these people, like, if your goal is to have a good country where, like, the people's will is being represented properly, yeah, this ain't the way of doing it. You have gone from 2 to the power of 2 to the power of 1,000 options to just 12. A mere 12 options. So yeah, it is, like, on so many ways just a bad system to have a representative democracy. It's just not representing the people's will. The will of the people is not represented in the law. It's just not. Because, like, even if you assumed that every politician was not bribed, or just stupid, or blinded by some ideology, or whatever, even if you assumed that there was some perfect person who perfectly represented the will of that group amongst the greater population, the specific people that the representative is supposed to represent, even if you assume that the representative perfectly represents those mentioned people, even then, you have now taken this list of 2 to the power of 1000 options and reduced it to 12. So, yeah, that's a problem. That's a big problem because, well, if you don't understand why, then you're just stupid. I don't think I should need to explain it to you. Going from 2 to the power of 1000 options to 12, that's less options. So how are the people will supposed to be represented here? Well, it's just not going to be. Because unless you just by pure coincidence alone just so happen to perfectly align with a political party, the answers to the questions are the exact same as what that party would choose. Unless that is the case, well, can you really vote for any of them? Because the unique combinations possible with 2 to the power of 1000 options, well, they're just not going to have that option. You cannot really vote for any of those parties because, well, they just don't represent you. You have your choice out of those 2 to the power of 1000 options, and the political party has theirs. Each political party has an option, has one of those options. Out of the 2 to the power of 1000 options, each political party chooses one of those. But the overwhelming chance is that they don't choose the one that you would choose. So, yeah, can you really vote for any party? Not really, because you can't fundamentally agree 100% with any party. And that itself is just a problem, because if the purpose of a democratic system is to have the people's will be represented in the law and just the law, whatever, then, if you can't have your will be represented, by definition, because the party doesn't have the option that you want, because the party chose a different option out of those 1 to the power of 1000 options, the party chose something different, and no party represents the view that you have, well then, no party represents the view you have. So therefore, is your view being represented in the process, in the government, and in the law? Well, my answer is no, it's not being represented. And it's not just my answer, unless I'm seriously mistaken here somehow, which I just don't see how I could be because this is just math. Then, your will is not being represented. So, then it just comes down to a philosophic question: does everyone's view need to be represented? Yeah, well, ideally I would like to say that yes. And in fact, many people who are fans of democracy or proponents of democracy, perhaps I should say, people who would be in favor of democracy, they tend to have the idea, the view that people's will should be the one to decide, but these people are just mistaken. A representative democracy does not represent the people's views. Fundamentally, it cannot. The only thing you can choose is the closest thing out of those options that the parties provide to your option. Since originally there would have been 2 to the power of 1000 options, and now there are 12, because there are only a dozen parties, you can only choose one of those options that the parties provide, so just 12. So you can only try to choose you can only try to choose the closest most one to yours, and that's not how you would do it. Just imagine that in a system, imagine this is a imaginary thought experiment. Let's say that you go to some voting booth or whatever, and then there's a list of 1000 questions where you can answer yes or no. Okay, so this is the ideal system what I would propose. But then imagine that some of those questions were just already answered and you couldn't actually answer them, or someone else was also there in the phone booth, in the fucking voting booth, whatever, the voting booth, someone else was there in the voting booth with you, and they also get to vote on some of those issues, and they are gonna answer yes or no in behalf of you, and like you just don't get to vote on some of those issues. Like, what kind of a system is that? Well, that's representative democracy for you. Now, is that not retarded? That is retarded. That is stupid. And people who like to say that they are like in favor of democracy because they believe in this people's will and whatever, they want majority of the people to decide. Yeah, well, like, if you think that representative democracy is the answer, then you're so stupid. You're stupid if you can't see this. A representative democracy is just how I just described. It's just how I just described with that imaginary thought experiment. You sit in a voting booth, and you're there voting, and then someone else is also there, and they vote in behalf of you, and they just answer some of those questions, and then you don't get to correct them. They just answer some of those, and yeah, like, that's stupid. You see, the way it works, how it compares to representative democracy, is by you choosing out of those dozen parties the one that is closest to you. So the one that is closest to you then naturally has some of those questions align with you and some of them don't. So therefore, you in that voting booth, you get to choose some of those ones that would align with that political party, and then the ones that don't align with the political party, they are the ones that the another person in that voting booth with you would choose differently. So yeah, that's like how that would work. And if you can see what's wrong with this, with someone else being in the voting booth with you and answering some of those questions that you don't get to answer them yourself, then you can see the problem with representative democracy, because fundamentally that's what it is. It's just someone else getting to vote on some of those issues that you don't actually agree with. Like, it just doesn't work. Like, how stupid do you have to be to think that this is actually like real, like ideal, like people's will and all that stuff? Like, no, that's just some retarded, stupid nonsense. And like, oof. Yeah, no country, as far as I'm aware, has like this true democracy. Like, I would call this true democracy, where everyone past a certain age limit gets to vote on each issue specifically, separately. Discrete issues. And no representatives. Yeah, away with representatives. The representatives don't actually represent the people. Yeah, so the true democracy, as I would describe it, that would represent the people's will, because then actually the majority of the people get to choose what they want on each issue. So no country on earth, as far as I'm aware, has true democracy. They are all just illusions of democracy. They are just fake democracies, all of them, each and every last one of them. Because even if there was no corruption, which is not the case anywhere, there are varying levels of corruption across the world. There are more or less corruption, but even if there hypothetically was a country with absolutely no corruption, which is a requirement to have a representative democracy in the first place, because if there's even a single corruption, well, then it's not representing the people. So the whole concept of representative democracy itself isn't even at work there. If it's corrupt politicians taking money from companies that have a lot of money that they give to the politicians, well, then that is a plutocracy. Plutocracy is a form of governance where the rich rule. The rich who have a lot of money, because they have a lot of money, they have a lot of money to give to politicians in the form of bribes, and then the rich get their way because the politicians get the money from them, and yeah, that's how bribes work. The poor, they don't have any money to give to the politicians, so they don't get their way. So plutocracy, rule of the rich. There are varying levels of corruption around the world. And by definition, even if there's a single corruption, then it's not even a representative democracy anymore. Because representative democracy is supposed to have those representatives represent the interests of those groups amongst the people. So yeah, So not only are there no proper representative democracies, there are also no true democracies at all. Because representative democracies, even if it worked, it's not a true democracy. It doesn't actually represent the people's will. So really, there is no true democracy. Why? Well, perhaps for the same reason as there has basically never been. No, that's not really true, because there have been numerous instances of true democracy around the world. But those are historical things, and like they existed only in very specific circumstances. And like, well, take Iceland for example. That could have been considered a kind of true democracy at some point in history. There have been some examples like that, but even the way those worked, they kind of would have eventually devolved into some warlord things, because they didn't really have any centralized governments and such things at all. So it's not even really comparable, because I'm talking specifically about nation states, and the Icelanders of some point in history, they might have had some freedoms there and whatever, but it's not exactly the same anyway. Yeah, so a nation state with a government and all that stuff, there is no true democracy. Nowhere on earth is the people's will actually being represented. And how unfortunate is that? Like, it is bizarre to me that like there are like the people like all over the world, like there's all this talk about like democracy, how like democracy is good and like all that stuff, like people in favor of quote democracy unquote, and like it's supposed to be like this good thing, and like people talk about it and like all that stuff, and yeah, like nowhere on earth is the people's will actually being represented. It's a lie. It's just a fake illusion. So again, I repeat, for one, we don't even actually have representative democracies in like many places, because they are actually plutocracies disguised as representative democracies. And even if you have the good luck of having a sort of functional representative democracy, well, even that is still not true democracy, true representation of the people's will in law and the government. So, yeah, that is unfortunate. Yeah, it is so unfortunate. Yeah. I guess I've said what I have to say. Now it's just time for me to talk about hypotheticals and wonder about the future and the past and all that stuff. Yeah, one can wonder then that will there perhaps be someday in the future, well, where there will be a government that truly actually represents the people's will, and there are votings on specific issues given to the people themselves, not to some representative. The people need to be the ones to decide on the issues, not representatives. So, yeah, it's so unfortunate to me. Like, people, they are really stupid. Like, I always say this, people are stupid. And then there are some people who are less stupid, who tend to be, for the most part, evil people, who use their lack of stupidity and some power they may have against the rest of the population who are stupid. And like, that tends to be the way things work. There may be a few altruistic good people who are not necessarily too stupid, but then they lack any power or something else to actually get anything done, and there are just a few of them. Less of them. So yeah, the default tendency in the world tends to be evil prevails. And it is so unfortunate, it is really unfortunate, like, what a pain, you know. One wonders if there's some secret conspiracy going on where like all this talk about the democracy and all that stuff is purposefully done as like there's a specific intention in having this talk about like and having this illusion of democracy around the world, to pretend to the people that they have a say in things, to pretend to the people that, oh yes, your views are actually being represented. There is no problem. See here, there's your democratic process and your government, and they have your best interest in mind. So then those people can be calm and controlled easier. Yeah, perhaps they have a lesser likelihood of rebelling or something. They are easier to control if they believe that they have a say when they really don't. So, yeah, but that's just a random conspiracy theory. Yeah, who knows? Maybe it is all just an illusion. I mean, obviously, in the case of those plutocracies, I would assume that is the case. So, yeah, that is my default assumption that, like, yeah, take a plutocratic government, a nation state. It pretends to be a democracy. So, it's not even a representative democracy, it's a plutocracy. Just call it what it is. It is disguised as a representative democracy, where really it is just a plutocracy. So, obviously, in the case of those, they are, as I described, they are illusions of democracy to keep the people in control, and yeah, they are not going to be angry when they think they have a say when they really don't. So you're just lying to them. But I wonder then, perhaps this isn't limited to just those plutocracies. Perhaps they are limited to even the less plutocratic. Remember, the governments can be more or less corrupt, not perfectly not corrupt. Anyway, one wonders if the illusion extends to every representative democracy, even the ones that are less plutocratic. Yeah. But who would be behind it? Who knows? There are many people and groups that some would point to, perhaps. But the purpose of this speech is not to point out who it would be, or who I might think it is, or who anyone would think it is. It's not really that important right now, perhaps. But yeah, how unfortunate. Evil everywhere. Why is evil the default in the world? Yeah, well, perhaps people are too stupid. Yeah, the rest of this speech is probably just me complaining about how people are stupid. You know, for one, people are so stupid. Like, let's look at some historical example. I'm not gonna provide any example, but I'm just gonna talk about history in some poor fashion. Let's see. In history, if you have some democratic revolution, okay, so you have a country that is previously some kind of aristocratic thing, or some dictatorship, or whatever you want to call it, doesn't really matter. Not any kind of democratic system, even remotely resembling one. And then there's some revolution and the people get some like democratic system kind installed, and then they celebrate how now the people's will are being represented, and that like this is like a good thing and the evil has been defeated and whatever. But like, yeah, what did you do? What did you accomplish? You got this half-assed, dysfunctional system that doesn't even really represent the people's will. And with good luck, you might have most of the people get the vote in the first place, even that's not a guarantee. So, yeah, with good luck, you have most of the people, or all of them, who get to vote at all. And even then, at best, you just have some random clown you get to vote for, and then that random clown is corrupt. And yeah, like, at no point in this process does the people's will actually, like, yeah, it just doesn't work. Yeah, fuck this, fuck everyone, it's all nonsense. What we need is true democracy. What we need is for everyone to get to vote on every issue. That is the only way things can be done. And have the people's will be represented, actually, the real people's will. Because unless you, just by pure coincidence, happen to agree with every single issue that a political party votes for exactly like you would do it, which is extremely unlikely, then you don't get represented. Understand this. You don't have your will represented in the law. You just don't. Because so long as there's even just a teeny tiny one single difference in the view of some political party and yours, well, even just that one small difference means that difference that opinion of yours is not being represented, because it's just not. You get to choose out of those political parties that are 12 of, there are 12 of them, and if you don't exactly agree with everything, then your views are not being represented. I know I'm repeating myself, but yeah. Whatever, who cares about the repetition now? Who cares about this speech's structure? That's not important. The important thing is that the point gets across. That indeed, representative democracy is a failure, and what we need is true democracy. Indeed. So let true democracy prevail. What we need is a revolution around the world where true democracy gets in power. Yeah, be gone all the evil conspiracies and interest groups and all that stuff. Yeah. Okay, that's the end of this speech. Thanks for listening. Until next time, bye.